Of those of us in Gen Z, about 49-50%, so about half of us, feel high anxiety, high stress, and to some degree burnt out. And that is a rather high number, and I'd say kind of concerningly high too. But at the same time, high anxiety is now, it seems to be at an all time high. And I want to talk about that. So, keeping everything simple, let's dive into this idea around anxiety post pandemic. Welcome back to the Keeping Everything Simple podcast. I'm your host and fellow learner, Michael Klukas, and this is the show where we boil down complex topics into simple, actionable tips. So, it seems a bit odd, or it feels a little bit odd to actually be talking about anxiety because I don't personally have anxiety. And when I say I don't have anxiety, I don't mean the general, I'm nervous about something, or hey, I have a big presentation and I feel anxious about it. That I do have. What I'm talking about is the chronic anxiety in which, a lot of things feel overwhelming, or there's a general fear of going out and doing certain things, or it's just an overall feeling of uncertainty and overwhelm from just the state of the world and state of your life. That's not something that I personally have, but there's a lot of people in my life that do. And the more that I think about it and the more that I learn about it and read about it, it's something that we also are aware that a lot of those in Gen Z have as well. A lot of them have anxiety. A lot of us have anxiety. And I think it's for good reason too. And so that kind of starts me off with point number one here, which is that your mental health is just as important as your physical health. And it gets as tired as your physical health does too. So for those of you who enjoy working out, enjoy going to the gym and everything, you know that after you're going through your entire workout, after you're finishing a set, that generally you're pretty tired. After you're going through your entire workout, all the reps are done, your body is super tired. Your mind might be jazzed up that, I got a workout in, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling strong, unless you happen to miss your PR, but that's not the topic of this video or this podcast. But then at the end of it, you're tired, you're exhausted, and you feel good. However, when you're tired and exhausted mentally, the feeling doesn't, to me, seem as good. It's not exactly a pleasurable feeling of accomplishment. When you're tired mentally, there can be mental drain, emotional drain. You have stretched yourself so thin that you're not able to fully bring yourself to your work, to your life, to your friends, to your loved ones, whatever it is. And that in of itself is not something that is very encouraging for a lot of people. It instead puts together this narrative of, hey, if you're doing fine physically, then you must be doing fine mentally. So keep pushing, keep going. However, it's the same as when you do a workout, the things you're doing afterwards, it's usually a post-workout meal. It should be some stretching. It should be something to help yourself rest and recover because that's what builds muscle. And if you're going to stretch and grow the muscles of your mental health and mental flexibility, then you gotta work in time to rest, recover, and recharge it. And overall, that kind of then cascades into this overall idea in the workplace, where in past generations, it's been this idea that to get ahead, you have to give more than you actually get. You have to be willing to go the extra mile. And while I'm a fan and advocate of giving 110% to whatever you're really passionate about and really aiming to do, because if something is worth doing, it's worth doing it well, the problem here comes from this idea of sacrificing yourself to actually get ahead. That's something that I take an issue with simply because it doesn't make sense to do. So when I said if something's worth doing, I meant that it's worth doing if you're passionate about it, if you're really driven to do so. And this isn't me saying, hey, you have responsibilities, don't do them because, they're not exciting. But especially in the workplace, while I subscribe to the notion of give more to get ahead, you have to do so within reason. You can't sacrifice your health physically. You can't sacrifice your mental health emotionally. And at the same time, you can't sacrifice the quality of your life just to get ahead. There's people that I will talk to and people in which I read about their lives and see when they think back to what do they wish they'd done differently, what do they wish they had focused more on, it's not usually, I really wish I had made that extra $500 a month. I really wish that I had not gone to my son's birthday party so I could actively work on this large project more. It's not these types of things that they generally look back on and think, you know what, this is what I really wish I had done. It's, I wish I'd spent more time with my family. I wish I'd spent more time with my hobbies. I wish I spent more time with my spouse so we'd have a better relationship today. So that way I'd be more active today by going to the gym. It's these things in which you should not sacrifice the quality of your life, your personal life, just for the immediate gains or even the long-term gains in your future career. I'm an advocate for balance, and there is a balance that you can strike for each individual. And so I'm going to go back and kind of use like the example of like Gary Vaynerchuk or Alex Hormozi as an example here, in which, to my knowledge, if I remember correctly, Gary V will work the long days. I think he likes to work like 10 hours, something like that on average. I'd have to double check that. But then he still gets the 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep a night. He still makes time for his family. He still actively goes and works out. He does these things while still running a very successful business and enterprise. And same thing for Alex Hormozi. So while he's all about the hustle and all about trying to help people reach their first $100 million, he at the same time, it sounds like when he and his wife Layla will actually spend time together, they try to focus not so much on work. And this is, I could just be totally misreading that or mishearing that from whenever I listened to that podcast on his. But the point is, you shouldn't be sacrificing so much in your life that you're going to look back on it and regret not being able to actually be present and mentally enjoy the time that you're in. That's not the route I want you to go down. So again, it's important if you do want to get ahead and make strides in your career to be willing to do a bit more than others. However, I don't recommend giving up your life just to do so. And so when I'm talking about this idea of, not letting your life be controlled by your job, so Gen Z is kind of in what's described as an early life crisis. So you have, and we probably all know what a midlife crisis is. We generally think about someone who's in like their 40s, their 50s, and this is parts that you see in the cartoons, the movies, they dye their hair, they get an expensive car, they get an entirely new wardrobe. They try to spice something up because they're kind of floundering. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what they're doing next. And that's scary. That's unnerving to be able to see that I've made it more or less in the career that I wanted, the life I wanted to lead, and I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied. There's something wrong, something missing. And for those of us in Gen Z, we're experiencing this at an early point in life. So we entered the workforce at the height of a pandemic. So a lot of things in which some of our older cohorts might understand and might know intuitively because of their time in it, we're learning. We originally learned through a screen, and that in itself doesn't fully translate to now us wanting to go back into the office. But overall, this then created a shift in the narrative for us because that early life crisis is, for a lot of people, it sounds like, and this is just something I've observed and feels like the situation, that at some point their job becomes their personality. Their job becomes who they are. And this is something that, if I'm recalling correctly, happens when, say, there's a retiree who has worked in their field for a large portion of their career and they leave the job and they don't know what to do. They don't know who they are because their life revolved around that identity at work. Maybe they were a lawyer and that's what they told all their friends. Maybe they were a doctor. Maybe they were an entrepreneur and they finally decided to exit out of the game. Maybe they were a teacher. Whatever it is, some people, their job becomes who they are, and that can be okay. However, with Gen Z, like I said, there's a lot of anxiety and stress, especially around this idea of careers. Will we be able to retire in the future? Will we be able to afford our own homes in the future? Will this career actually allow me to achieve the things I want and lead me to have a fulfilling career? We're worried about this. And for us, we're floundering in a different way, but through the same lens of trying to find out who do we want to be, who are we going to be, and what are we going to do for our careers? Because we don't want our jobs to be our personality. We want to be able to bring our whole selves to work and at the same time still have our whole selves to bring out of work when we go home. And I heard this quote from someone in my life, and I completely forget who told me that, so I apologize to them if they're listening to this. But it was that you work to live, you don't live to work. And essentially just the message there being your job helps fund your life. Your job shouldn't be your life. And this, again, is in terms of maybe this isn't the job in which you feel called to do. Maybe this isn't the job in which you feel like you're going to make a huge impact on the world. Maybe this job doesn't align with your personal mission. So don't make this your life. Be able to keep it separate. Be able to have that balance and at the same time still do good work in your career and in your personal life. And I feel it's a bit closer to say that for those of us in Gen Z, if we're going to work, we want it to be closer to an addition. We want it to be an addition to the life we lead and a positive one, not one where we have to give so much to it that it just drains us of our ability to actually go out after work, see our friends, families, do the hobbies we love, and actually get to rest and recharge. Because again, going back to this idea of mental drain and being so tired because of so much time you're dedicating towards something, we want to be able to have jobs that still allow us and still enable us to have lives outside of work. And companies are actually catching on to this, where there is that emphasis on mental health days, finding work that aligns more with your skills and your values. And this is something that I encourage you to push for, especially in your own career and wherever you are working right now. Being able to say, hey, this company actually does care if I'm not doing good mentally, and they will help me try to get better. Maybe it's going to be an extra day of rest. Maybe it's going to be moving to a different role for a little bit. And maybe it's going to help me explore different roles so I can find where I'm truly the most effective and most useful. And I want to encourage these conversations to happen because this is a trend that I believe is a good outcome, and it should be here to stay, to say, hey, if my employee can only give 80% today because of some personal issue at home, because they're burnt out, because the anxiety is just so bad, because they can't fully focus right now, I'm just going to ask for 100%. And so that means if you only have 80 to give, you fully give that 80, and that's just what they get. And that should be okay, and that should be accepted. And then beyond just protecting your mental health, like I said, I think there's a shift towards finding meaningful work. We have organizations like 80,000 Hours where they're trying to find jobs and careers that have a meaningful impact on the world and encouraging people to apply to them, because if you're spending a third of your life at work, and generally for some people even more time at work than you do at home, it makes a lot of sense to try to do something that's going to be super impactful in your career. And while Gen Z is entering the workforce, we are trying to emphasize this change of letting yourself rest, letting yourself align yourself with the values and goals that you have in the career that you want and the careers that are available. And even though more realistically, Gen Z is kind of more workaholics, because it sounds like most of us are juggling 2 jobs to actually make ends meet. You can listen to the last episode or check out the last episode on YouTube about that. But it still is something that we're understanding. You'll see it on TikTok, you see it on Instagram, wherever you're trying to find advice on work. There's a lot of emphasis on work-life balance. Let yourself rest physically. Let yourself rest mentally. So that way you're not constantly chipping away at the battery power that you have mentally to show up. And I will also note that for those of my generation, this idea of work-life balance to preserve our mental health, to preserve our physical health, the pandemic also has given us our own unique spin on it. And I can't fully speak to what everyone feels because that'd be an overly generalized statement. And I don't think that's usually the best route to go. But I do think that the pandemic did give us a more unique perspective on work-life balance, because if we're going to be able to do remote work, if we're going to be returning to the office, whatever the situation is, we spent a good portion of the early part of our career so far disconnected in companies that did layoffs, in companies that weren't ready to go remote, in companies that didn't have a good environment that allowed us to actually step into our own and find good mentors and foster good relationships inside of work, as opposed to just having a transactional back and forth of like, this assignment's or this project's due, here it is, great, here's the next one, and so forth. And this is, again, a positive trend that I think we should embrace. This idea of redefining what work-life balance is, so that way when our employees or our team members come to work, they are able to bring their full selves. So that way you who are working feel like, oh, I'm not just here to fill a spot. I'm not here to just, finish up this project, be a cog in the machine, but I'm actually driving something. I'm actually doing something that's good, or I'm actually doing something that's productive. And I don't feel like I'm being drained and deprived of everything else that I could be doing in life instead. And this kind of all circles back to, again, we have a lot of anxiety as a generation, and anxiety as a whole has been on the rise. And this is very simple in terms of like, if you were to think about trying to go to therapy and getting a counselor, right now, a lot of places have a wait list because so many people are recognizing now that, hey, my mental health may not actually be that good. I have anxiety, or I have depression, or I'm just so overwhelmed and I need some way to process this. I need some way to actually be able to say, hey, I'm not doing good, or this job, this career, this field that I'm in doesn't suit me anymore. I need to process that. And I think one of the more amazing parts of this is that people are not really letting that stop them. They're not letting it stand in their way. And again, this is from me speaking from my experience of I don't have anxiety, so I can't personally fully understand what it's like. And I want to put that out there again. That if you do have anxiety, I do recommend trying to find counseling, trying to find therapy, and trying to find help, because finding ways to manage it, finding ways to not let it consume your life is super, super important, because it allows you to lead a more full life. It allows you to lead a more full career because you're able to bring more of your true self forward. And that's my opinion on that matter. Because I'm confident enough to say that for Gen Z, even though we have anxiety as a whole, so 1 out of every 2 of us more or less have anxiety, it doesn't stop us from pushing forward and trying to lead careers that we love, trying to make a life that's meaningful, and at the same time finding a balance between the two, and still, making time to have fun. Because it truly has been just one historical event after another for us. And with that, that's not an easy thing to deal with. It's not an easy transition to say, all right, one big thing happens after another. You should just totally be able to ride the waves, especially when mental health is now being something that we're trying to make the conversation more normal to talk about, but it wasn't as normal in the past, but you should have totally been able to figure it all out. No, definitely not. Instead, it's understanding that and being okay with, allowing yourself to be okay with the fact that there's been a lot that's happened in the past 10 years. And that's been very overwhelming for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. If you're a young worker, if you're a young leader, I want you to remember that feeling anxious, feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed can all happen. And while it can all happen, it also can be something that can be managed. I don't want you to feel like it's an impossible barrier that you can never get over, that it's something that's always going to prevent you from bringing your full self and being your full self. But instead, the more that you address it, the more that you unweave and unravel the stories behind the anxiety, behind the stress, behind the overwhelm, the more that you'll grow both in your personal life and in your career as a whole. So that's why I highly recommend, again, finding counseling for this. And at the same time, understanding that you're not alone in the anxiety, especially in the anxiety about finding a career that's actually meaningful or finding a job that doesn't make you feel like you're replaceable or that you can just be laid off at the drop of a hat. There's so much that causes people anxiety nowadays. And I want you to know that that's okay. It's okay because you're not alone. And at the same time, it's okay because there's resources out there that I encourage you to seek out and be able to take that step forward, because I hope and believe that there's a much better life and career waiting for you if you do. So be sure to like this video on YouTube if that's where you're watching it, or like us on your favorite podcast app and give us a rating on the iTunes store. Comment down below, what are some resources that you use to combat your anxiety? I hope you have an amazing day, you amazing people, and I will see you all in the next video. Go out there and do great things.